Let's bring in the Deputy Opposition Leader Sussan Ley now here live in the studio. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure, Kieran.
What do you say to the government now launching another inquiry into the Morrison matter?
Well, we note the Solicitor-General's advice, and as Peter Dutton has said, the appointments were validly made. That's what the Solicitor-General said. We will work with the government on any measures to improve transparency, and clearly there are processes that could be improved.
So another inquiry, you're comfortable with that? With the right person to undertake that?
Look, I think that the Prime Minister, he stood up for I don't know how many days running now. He hasn't talked once about your power prices that are going up and his broken promise, your grocery bills that are escalating every time you go to the supermarket, and your mortgage that is expected to once again go up next month.
He actually was. He did talk about the power prices yesterday. He was asked about it.
Well, he stood there for an hour today and I didn't hear it once. He's got an Attorney-General, he's got a Finance Minister. I'm sure they could do this careful, considered work with the Solicitor-General's report. Meanwhile, I think it would be good if the Prime Minister focused on the issues that are concerning every single Australian right now in small business, when it comes to skills, when it comes to a workforce of the future, when it comes to the cost of living.
We'll get to those in a moment because I'd a lot to talk to you about on that front as well. But on the inquiry, do you support the fact that the Prime Minister's announced this subsequent inquiry? The details yet to come, but he says it'll be someone with a legal background and eminent Australian.
Kieran, I don't know what that inquiry will look like. What I do know is that there is an ability for the Prime Minister's ministers to work through the report and come up with sensible proposals that we as an opposition have already said we will consider. If Mr Albanese wants to make this a great big inquiry and go on and on talking about everything that happened in the previous government, good luck to him. But what I know is that the people that I meet every single day are genuinely worried about cost of living and genuinely worried about the future of their businesses and the future of their families.
The government says it can do two things at once. That, you know, more than two things at once. It can do this response to the Morrison secret ministries, but do the Jobs Summit cost of living issues as well, that this is something in its own right that deserves to face scrutiny.
Well, let's see what comes out of the broad notion of an inquiry. I just want the government to focus on the things that matter and dedicate every single one of their ministers to those things that matter.
Should Scott Morrison cooperate with the inquiry?
Oh, look, I'm sure he will, and it's entirely a matter for him. And he's already made considered and detailed statements about all of these matters.
You said that you want the government to focus on things that matter. The Solicitor-General says, this is paragraph 46, the principles of responsible government are fundamentally undermined by the way that Scott Morrison behaved.
And we have said that we will work with the current government on how to improve these processes and transparency in the future.
But you said that you want the government to focus on things that matter. This legal advice would suggest that dealing with the secret ministries matters.
But if you step outside this studio and if you step away from Canberra into any suburb in Australia, you will hear people talking about the power prices that are going up. I visited small businesses and they showed me last quarter's power bill and this quarter's power bill. I've spoken to manufacturing businesses that are saying, how are we actually going to get the workforce we need? And the energy price is so high, we're not going to be able to make what we're doing right out here. And there are thousands of jobs and there are lots and lots of issues around how we do this well in order to sustain our workforce and our communities and our manufacturing sector and our industries. And I'm just not hearing the government talk about that.
But do you accept, though, that it's also very important that we don't have practices that undermine the fabric of our democracy?
And we have said,
leaders.
And Kieran, at the risk of repeating myself, we have said we will cooperate with any proposals to improve those processes.
Yeah, sure, and I get that.
Will.
But because you keep pivoting straight to the other issues, which of course are very important in terms of cost of living and everything else. They are important. Energy prices, very important to day-to-day lives. But this is also important, isn't it? Because if you don't have the right processes around governance of our leaders, it is a slippery slope.
Well, let's see what the proposals are, and then, as I said, we'll be at the table, and we've made that very clear.
Has this tarnished Scott Morrison's legacy in government?
Look, those are decisions that will be made by others in the future. I'm not a commentator, Kieran. I'm someone who stands up for ordinary Australians, battling at the moment, hurting at the moment, and looking for reassurance from a government that seems entirely focused on the rearview mirror.
Do you think the Governor-General is in the clear as well from this advice today?
I think the Prime Minister has accepted that the Governor-General acted appropriately.
But basically you're saying to me today that you think that voters have got to... Essentially, there's a window here for the Prime Minister to be focusing on this, and the voters will run out of patience, is what you're saying, isn't it?
I would never direct voters to think any which way, except to say that having heard these issues repeated continually by Anthony Albanese over many, many days, I'm not getting that reassurance that I know our businesses and our communities would like to see from the government. And I'm certainly not hearing it when I talk to them. There is a lot of focus on the past with these issues that are important and that need addressing and that will be addressed with the opposition at the table. Now, can we look for support and for understanding for our businesses that are hurting, for power prices that are increasing, for broken promises that are already becoming clear, and for a future that needs to be sound for the benefit of every single business and family.
Some of your colleagues are also looking back, though, aren't they? And Karen Andrews, for one, thinks Scott Morrison should quit the Parliament. It's still pretty raw among your colleagues, isn't it?
Well, I don't give gratuitous advice to my colleagues over any programs, and I accept that there are a range of different views, and everyone, of course, is free to express their views.
But they feel like they were dudded, basically, don't they?
Oh, well, they're your words, Kieran.
On your speech today to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, you warned about it. Well, you issued a good faith warning to the business community, is the way you put it. Proceed with caution. What do you mean by that when it comes to dealing with the government? Shouldn't you be saying to them, encourage them to engage with the government as best they can?
And I've certainly said that I understand they need to engage with the government in good faith. Look, next week, Kieran, there'll be the Prime Minister and a smorgasbord of his ministers standing up here in Canberra, talking and talking and talking. I can tell you where I'll be. I'll be in Lismore, where flood-affected communities are hurting months after the floods that Anthony Albanese spent a lot of time politicising during the campaign. And I might make the point that he hasn't visited those flood-affected residents once. Once, his interest has receded with the floodwaters, I reckon it's an hour and a half, door to door, in the Prime Ministerial jet that will get you everywhere you need to go. And I will be there talking to people on the ground who are really, really hurting with my fantastic colleague, Kevin Hogan, while this talkfest goes on in Canberra.
What do you mean by a good faith warning? Are you saying that this Labor government won't... Because they're obviously trying to build a consensus between unions and business right now. Are you saying that can't be believed in terms of their reaching out to business? Surely they should be judged on their activities as opposed to the history.
I think they've worked out what their announceables will be post the summit. I think there's been a level of being completely disingenuous. If you are lucky enough to be on the invitation list, I'm sure you may feel that you've been consulted, but we can come back to this conversation several months after the summit and see what actually transpired and whether any really good ideas that were presented to the government at the summit have actually made it through the complex bureaucratic white paper process that the government has said will follow. I mean, everyone remembers Kevin Rudd's summit precisely because no one can tell you a single thing that came out of it. So a talkfest in Canberra or actually acting on things that need to happen. And, my point really is...
Anthony Albanese pointed out that for the 2020 summit that the NDIS was actually born at that.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the NDIS came as a result of many different initiatives across the board, and certainly I acknowledge Julia Gillard's role in that. Look,
Isn't it better to bring people to the table and consult as opposed to sort of just have a top-down approach?
If the consultation is genuine, yes. But if the outcomes are predetermined, no. And the other problem with the summit, yes, it's rolling around and it's next week, But the government has been here, getting their feet under the desk, working through their incoming briefs for a long, long time now. We can give them 3 quick things that would work straight away. Our proposal to allow veterans and pensioners to work twice as much without affecting their pension bonus or their pension income is a really good one. Now, I mentioned this to Jason Clare on morning television the other day, and he said, oh, it's on the table. Well, how about taking it off the table, and how about actually implementing it? You don't need to wait for these things. Conversations around migration, when I've got so many examples of an urgent need for a skilled workforce. These measures could have been implemented already.
Is open to both those measures, though.
Okay, and why have they taken so long to actually get around to it? Because we've got to wait for next week, we've got to wait for outcomes, we've got to wait for conversations, we've got to wait for a white paper maybe. These things could have been put in place weeks ago.
It's a bit of a contrast.
They were obvious.
But it is a bit of a contrast, consultation versus a top-down approach in more ways than one from Scott Morrison.
Well, the consultation...
most of the power.
The consultation that needs to have happened is between the government and industry right now. So they're bringing, I think 30% of the summit will be union members. Yes, they should have a role, but they certainly also have indicated there'll be the singing from the union song sheet with all sorts of crazy measures. But the point is that when you put industry and community at the centre of your decision making, and when you consult with them as they should have done from day one, they wouldn't need to be waiting for this summit to come up with outcomes. So let's see.
And before we wrap up, you said that the Liberal Party should always be your party of choice to the business community. Given you've just lost and you're probably going to be out, you would think, for at least a couple of terms, according to most people's assessment, they should at least be trying to engage with the Labor government, surely.
And I've said that, and I absolutely understand that. And of course I back in my party as being the party of choice for business, because Labor is the party of higher taxes, higher levels of interference and higher levels of union involvement. And all of those things are anti-business. Just
finally, before you go, I know you've got a busy afternoon, but with the former Prime Minister, there's talk today the Greens are going to move a censure motion against Scott Morrison in the Parliament. Do you expect that to happen?
I don't know whether that will happen, and I don't know what the Greens are proposing. Most things that the Greens propose don't make any sense to me, but they also tie up a lot of wasted time.
Is there potentially a basis for a censure of Scott Morrison?
I don't think so. I don't know, Kieran, what will happen in the next sitting of Parliament, but I do know that the Greens will spend time wasting all of our time, again, not focusing on the things that matter to the everyday issues that affect Australians right here, right now.
They've even said they want a Royal Commission powers into this inquiry into Scott Morrison.
Well, there isn't an aspect of Greens policy that at the moment I think makes a single difference to people's lives, and it's the hurting that I'm seeing in the communities that I visit that matters most to me.
How's he holding up? I know you're friends with the former Prime Minister.
Oh, look, I'm sure he's fine. He's a tough individual. He's been through a lot.
Sussan Ley, thanks for your time.
Thank you.